for attending this session, and I should say that I am looking at my other screen where the tool is being presented. So if you see me on the camera and I'm looking off to the side, it's because I'm looking at the other screen. You can see that this tool, for those of you that are unfamiliar, has a couple of purposes, and I'll just recap that and go over the main features for those of you who have not seen the tool before quite quickly, before focusing on the new features for this update. It really is worth stating this purpose again, because the original idea for what is now this resource efficiency greenhouse gas performance monitoring tool was that it was a project monitoring tool. It was designed to start with to collect data from hotels in a one-way manner, meaning that the tool would collect data from the hotels and nothing would be given back apart from a periodic report on how the project was progressing, this transforming tourism project. Quite quickly, the team, the project team, and the hotels involved suggested that this was missing an opportunity. So the tool collecting data in one way and not providing any information back was not allowing the hotels to modify their resource efficiency practices in in real time, or quickly responding to the data they were collecting. And so instead of just being a data collection tool, this changed into a monitoring tool that showed performance as well. So it's a mix of data entry and data display. I hope that that's clear. I just want to reiterate it because it means that the design of the tool was put out in one way and had to change to accommodate the opportunity of the second purpose, and that has meant that the design was done in a way that was different to maybe how it would have been done with the second purpose from the start. So the tool shows these results, like I said, shows data so that hotels can see their performance in resource efficiency over time, and can compare different months and different years. On this sheet, you can see that all of the indicators are available to view, and you can compare, as I said, against different years and different months. There's a functional unit of a guest night, and that means that, sorry, I'll just mute everybody. Thanks. That you can see that there's a functional unit of a resource per guest night, meaning that instead of comparing a large hotel to a small hotel, or a busy hotel to a quiet hotel overall, you're comparing the amount of resources per guest across hotels, and that allows each hotel to understand their true performance for the number of guests they're catering. And that is the functional unit we've chosen. You may question why not the square foot or square meter, or volume even of a hotel. Why not that used instead of guest night? That is useful for heat, because of the amount of energy required to heat a space, but it's not that useful for water. Having a larger volume of hotel, you don't use as much water, and because you've got high ceilings, for example, so the guests are the best way of looking at resources across all of the different resources rather than just, say, energy. I'll skip over net zero for now because that's the new feature. You can print a report of some of the resources to be able to show stakeholders both internally and externally. And then the data entry sheets are all in yellow. Your facility information goes in the first one, and you can select the type of how you're going to input food data. There are two types, purchase and sales. It seems that the majority of hotels that we've tested this with prefer to enter their purchase data rather than the sales data for food. The different data entry sheets are relatively straightforward. You have the type of energy supply in this case, or water, or anything else that we're looking at, waste, and then what it is. Then the number of, in this case, megajoules per month for each of those different supplies. For water, we look at water and freshwater or grey water use, laundry, and different other questions that are relevant. If you have more sources than are available, you can insert a row to add more sources. Same with waste, that in this case we have mixed waste, recycled waste, and garden waste. Food waste has its separate tab. Sorry, that's food purchase. Food waste has its separate tab. You can separate your waste into different areas. So preparation, customer plate waste, and spoilage waste. And if you're not able to do that, you can enter a single food waste total. For the purchases that I showed, you can enter each of the types of things that you purchase for food. They have set categories that you have to select, and then you can summarize these above and select which year of the three that you can enter data for in this tool, and you'll get a summary. We have designed quality of use and quality of life features, so on smaller screens you can both hide or show the summary to allow you to have more room on screen. Plastics has a similar screen here with your top 10 single-use plastics, which is a increase from the top 5 we had before, and top 5 multiple-use plastics purchases, and a summary above. This sheet is a data summary, but mainly for the first purpose that I outlined at the beginning of the presentation, which is that data collection for the project. It's not very useful for seeing data from the perspective of a hotel or a stakeholder without a data analysis background. The greenhouse gas footprint is slightly better. Shows in terms of display, it shows your greenhouse gas footprint for each of your scopes. It's not a complete footprint, so it only reports the footprint for the data that has been entered into the tool. In theory, this should cover most, if not all, of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. It only covers food that is purchased and waste from your scope 3 emissions. But of the scope 3 emissions and of the total emissions footprint for hotels, if we're excluding customer travel, and I'll come on to the reason for that in a second, the food purchases make up the majority of your footprint. So that's why we've not gone into the minute detail of everything that can be included in scope 3, because food purchases make up the majority of it. Waste was included because it was a project indicator, so we needed to look at waste as well. The reason why we have excluded customer travel from scope 3 footprint is that it's not under the even minimal influence of hotels to change the way that customers travel to them, especially for international tourism. That there is almost nothing that businesses can do to change the way that guests arrive Uh, of course, you can put information about low carbon travel and those sorts of things, but ultimately it's not within your ability to influence the way that that's done. However, for food purchases, you can make significant decisions in terms of your procurement to change what and how much and which types, where from, all those sorts of things that will affect your scope 3 emissions from food. There's a even more detailed and slightly better visually displaying footprint for food purchases here. There's a water footprint for food as well. The majority of the water footprints from food, so we've only done it for food. There's a table of conversion factors at the end as well. So while you as a hotel may not collect your energy data in megajoules, that's what's required for the tool. Again, a legacy of the project having specified indicators for reporting. What we've done to help with that is, depending on how you do collect your data, so say from energy bills and maybe kilowatt hour usages, you can type that in to this cell and it will convert to megajoules. So say you have 10,000 kilowatt hours, it will convert it to 36,000 megajoules. The conversion factors are also, some of the conversion factors are also in this box here to do manually if you wish. So that's been a relatively quick, although not that quick in terms of time, recap of the tool for new users. The feature that I'd like to spend a bit more time on is this net zero trajectory tab. So what this does is it takes the information that you have entered into the different resource data entry tabs and has been converted into a greenhouse gas footprint into a trajectory of emissions, hopefully reduction, but potentially increase over time. This tool only looks at 3 years. We are rebuilding the tool to take 10 years of data, but for this tool, this version, it will only take 3 years. So you can see on this graph how your 3 years of data in the blue line look. So you are indexed against a baseline year, and I'll come to that in a second, which is 100%. So your baseline is your baseline, and then you are looking at your reduction against your baseline, and that's how net zero works. You set a baseline, and you're trying to reduce your emissions to zero, and what you cannot reduce, you are offsetting. The baseline data should come from the tool as well, and you can see here that this is very similar to the greenhouse gas footprint tab. So what you would do is take your total from your baseline year. So say you had a separate sheet from the year 2019 with your total year one greenhouse gas footprint data, and you copy from here and you paste into the net zero trajectory for each of the relevant inputs. It's the same thing. So all of those would go in here. You'd select the year for which the data is the baseline data is, and it will calculate, just sum up your scopes for the baseline. You can hide and show by clicking that button. And then that will be converted to an index amount of 100% to show on the graph, and anything else in the current version of the tool that you're using for data entry. So say it was 2021, 2022, that it will display that here as a percentage of your baseline. This row here is looking at your intended emissions reduction path. What this means is, as a business, hopefully you will have thoughts on how you're going to achieve net zero, and the action plans that you have will have milestone dates, will have a strategy involved, and that strategy should consider how quickly you are looking to make reductions. And there are three main types of reduction paths that we've outlined here. And the first that's displaying at the moment is linear, meaning that from your baseline year to net zero in 2050, you will be making the same or similar reductions every year. So it doesn't matter that some things are easier to do and some things are harder to do. You are going to be aiming to achieve the same amount of reductions every year. And that's what's showing on the graph at the moment in this orange line. So what this is saying is that from your baseline year in 2021, you are reducing the amount of percentage from 100% to 0% in, oh, it might not be 0%. I need to double check that. That there's an assumption of what you might realistically get down to in terms of emissions, that some emissions will never be completely reduced, so you'll need to offset them. That what you're looking at is a linear path here. So we can change that to a different type of path, saying that actually, as a business, we are going to spend time working out our strategy, understanding impact actions, talking with our suppliers, looking at when our contracts are finishing, and planning for the future to make significant reductions in future years. And our initial reductions will be small because we're going to take the time to plan how to do this, and we're not going to rush into making reductions that we then cannot build on later. That's perfectly valid, and it means that you will be able to see this path here. I'll just mute everyone again. That you can see a implied slow then fast path here. It's not that this is exactly the sort of path that you might be intending to take. It's more of a guide to say what slow progress in the first few years might look like. And then you can see actual progress in this tool against what a slow then fast curve might look like. So you can see in this case that the actual data is off track. So we've got on track and off track. Off track meaning that the progress that's being made with the dummy data in this tool is not on track to achieve net zero using the slow then fast path. And because that's the most gentle path at the start, that this current data would not be on track in any of the paths, because the other path that we've modeled is fast then slow, meaning that most more significant and harder emissions reductions are taken more quickly. By harder, I mean more significant and deeper cuts to emissions are made more quickly. And then as it becomes more difficult to reduce emissions over time towards 2050, you are not anticipating year on year that you'll reduce your emissions as much. Therefore, it's a fast then slow curve. And again, you can see what the data in the tool shows that for the years here that it's not that good, not looking that good. So if we move say the baseline is even further away, you can see that we'd be even more off track. What we would need to do to change this is to say that the data that we've put into the tool would be much lower than this baseline year. So you can see that significant emissions reductions are required to get down this curve. There are some assumptions. This really is a guide. It's not saying that you will not achieve net zero if you're not on track according to our model. It's more of a, if you're close, you're probably doing okay. If you're quite far away, then maybe you want to reconsider what you're doing, and when you do it. So, as I said, a guide. Um, we have assumed that you are not, um, that you've essentially not done anything before your baseline year, and therefore that the year you're starting to act on your emissions reductions is your baseline year. Um, This isn't necessarily the case. The baseline year could be picked for many reasons, such as that's the year that there's an agreed methodology on how to collect data, or that's the year that a new strategy on greenhouse gas emissions reductions was started. So there are lots of reasons to set a baseline year. It's just this is the one we've had to assume for this model. Um, we have suggested that you will start before 2026. Um, that's We don't think that net zero can be hit through emissions reductions alone. Well, say alone, it's probably not going to be hit through emissions reductions alone by most companies, but we don't think that the majority of emissions reductions can happen quickly enough if you start too late. That's what that's saying. Um, we are saying that in line with most net zero commitments and guidance for business, that starting from 2010 or later as your baseline um, assumes a 50% reduction by 2030, with the slow then fast or the fast and slow trajectory, meaning that you have to achieve 50% emissions reductions cuts if you started after 2010. Um, by 2030, and that's essentially saying if we don't do something, and a lot of it, in the next now 9 years, sorry, 8 years, I'm losing track of time, the next 8 years, then we will not achieve net zero. um, for the fast and slow, or slow and fast, if you start your action and therefore your baseline, we are saying that it calculates from the baseline year the path. So if you start after 2010, then we're saying that sort of curve will always hit 50% at 2030. Whereas if you start before 2010, you may hit 50% before or after 2030, because you've got um, a clear longer term reduction strategy, and therefore we're not necessarily expecting that you need to do something really quickly and cut. Um, it's also likely that if you started before 2010, your absolute emissions are going to be lower than a hotel that has started later than you. The This is a bit of a controversial assumption. We're essentially saying that there will not be many emissions that your business will be putting into the atmosphere through scopes 1, 2, or 3 by 2050. Um, that was because, and the alternative is there are residual emissions, and those are the ones that you have to offset or capture through some sort of carbon capture and storage, sequestration and utilization. That it's a controversial assumption because there are a lot of emissions to reduce, obviously, and that there could be quite a range of things that could be done by different businesses with their residual emissions. Um, minimal or zero is a very, very optimistic assumption. It's just one that was possible to model in the constraints of both time and what we had available. So do bear that in mind, that potentially in the future there will be capture and sequestration options available that are robust and reliable for businesses around the world. Currently, they don't really exist apart from tree planting, and that is not as potentially well managed in the majority of the world as it needs to be to sequester enough emissions. So this is a bit of a controversial assumption. As I said, that's why we're looking at this path as a guide rather than some sort of examination. You may have signed up to, or you may be aware of, the Science Based Targets initiative. Now, that initiative is fantastic in trying to make sure that businesses are setting the targets and actions to achieve those targets based on the science. In the case of greenhouse gases, they have created a guidance on how to set science-based targets and measure progress against them. And we do not follow that guidance exactly. Instead, we apply the principles. And that's because we have a 3-year monitoring tool and we're not able to show the performance over time, the actual performance over time outside of those 3 years within the tool. So we've had to take some assumptions and model them. Just to repeat again, this is so that we can provide a guide to businesses rather than hold them to account, if that makes sense. So that concludes the demonstration of the main new feature, and there were some additional edits and bug fixes in the latest version, but I won't go over them as they're much less important. We have some submitted questions from before the start of this, and also I wonder if we could open for questions now live as well. So please do type any questions into the chat, and if not, I will start reading questions and trying to answer them from the registration.
Hi, Sam.
Hello,
Is it
Andy.
okay if I go ahead to say something?
Yes.
So I've from the questions on the registration, I've compiled some important questions. Maybe we can go through those ones first. I can read them out loud for you. That's
Sure,
okay.
I've got them on my screen as well. So they're the ones that you've bolded, is that right?
Yes, those are the ones.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm happy if to read them if it will save your voice.
All right, sure. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question is, since we're not collecting 2020, will it still be okay to skip a year? Essentially, the tool doesn't mind when you start, apart from this this net zero calculation where you're looking to have set a baseline pretty much or either already or last year. This data that you're collecting hopefully have already collected. So it's not necessarily a problem to have skipped 2020. I've just understood why that's needed. Apologies. I'll start answering the question again. 2020 was obviously a year heavily impacted by COVID. It's not a problem to not report that year. I think it would still be useful, even though I understand it would take a lot of time to do, given the output would be less useful. it's an anomaly, and you know that. So not collecting 2020 data is probably the most, or not displaying it, not reporting on it is probably the most sensible course of action. I'm not speaking for the project here. I'm speaking in terms of the most sensible for your business reporting and understanding your true resource efficiency performance. The second question is, who are the hotels using this tool? And that's not a question that I can personally answer, and also one that I shouldn't answer due to the data use and protection part of this. So any information that I have seen about which hotels are using it and reporting data to me is not something that I'm at liberty to share, because it's that's sensitive data that has been shared with me in confidence. And I'd like to mention that because hopefully it will give you confidence to submit data to Percepsy and UNEP for this project, in that it will not be shared and identifiable to any of your competitors or to anyone else outside of the project team. Andy, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add about hotels that are participating in the project and potentially using the tool, or anything that you are able to say. I just know that I cannot from what I have been shared.
Hi Sam. I have on Percepsy side we have nothing to add. Although in my perspective, I think it's a feat to be proud of if the hotels are using the RE tool. So and I've discussed this with some hotels. They have no I guess qualms in revealing, but I guess for everyone's comfort right now, then we can skip this question.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know that that some hotels have no qualms. So if you're happy to share those hotels, if you know that they have said they are happy to be identified, then please do so in chat. The third question is, how can we, or is there a plan to be able to incorporate food miles? So food miles was something that we excluded from the tool because in terms of total footprint of food, from both greenhouse gas and water footprint perspective, it makes up a minimal part. Um, the It is included to a degree in that the footprint calculations and emissions factors and water footprints take food miles in general into account. Excuse me. So what we have done is for high impact foods like red meat, for example, looked at the balance of trade for the Philippines and the Dominican Republic, the two countries for which this tool was originally designed, and used different footprint factors for the different sources of those red meats. So if I make that more clear, for the Philippines, a certain proportion will be coming from Asia, a certain proportion will be coming from Oceania, and that those different sources will have different footprints, including the travel to the Philippines from those locations. Therefore, we used, say, beef sourced from New Zealand or lamb sourced from New Zealand would have a slightly different footprint, and including some travel assumptions in them. What we have not done is suggested that or made it available to a hotel to say we source our tomatoes or our rice from down the road from a few miles away, and therefore we can edit our footprint to reduce the greenhouse gases from that food by this much. And that's because it's overly complicated, and the proportion in terms of percentage that you'll be reducing your greenhouse gas emissions from the food is minimal compared to the food itself. And what I mean by that is if you reduce the amount of red meat that you purchase, you'll by far be offsetting any savings or increases from travel that you might have food miles, I mean. So say you started buying all of your fruit from Latin America, that it would likely be completely offset by reductions in meat purchases that you made, just because of the relative amount of emissions from the production of high impact foods versus the travel that it takes to get those foods to your country and to your hotel. I really hope that makes sense, but essentially we didn't include it because food miles make up a very small proportion of the footprint of food. So the next question is, we have two membership clubs, one of which is a golf and sports club. Can we use the resource efficiency tool to account for the greenhouse gas of the property? So there is a sort of a feature to do that, in that we have a feature, something in the tool to look at meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. In the facility info, we've got conference delegates. Now, that could be similar to the club memberships that you've suggested. So I wouldn't say that delegates and members are the same. I'd suggest that conference delegates and day guests to the clubs could be quite similar. Now, obviously, I'm sure you will have a better understanding of the similarity between conference delegate, or differences between conference delegates and club attendees, but this would be how the tool would account for membership clubs. So you would count your number of guests to the clubs by day, and put them in here. I say by day, by month, and put them in here. And you would account for the energy usage, the water consumption, the waste, etc., from those clubs in the tool as usual, but you would just add a different waste unit, or water or electricity. So you might say for example. And I hope that makes sense. You just need to account for your club your club resource use and greenhouse gas consumption in the usual way, but you need to add your day guests in the under conference delegates. The next question is, how can we avail of this? And apologies, my understanding of the question might be off, but I think that means how can we access the tool and how can we use it? So the tool is and was, at last time I checked, available on the One Planet Network website. The current version, I need to double check, and we can do that. I think Percepty can confirm when we've checked. The current version was being tested, and therefore I'm not sure it is available live on the website. So we'll have to double check that. But as soon as it is available, that Percepty can share that with attendees.
Hi, Sam. Yes,
Hi.
we also want to be able to say that we'll coordinate with you right after the meeting regarding whether we can put the tool up online. But again, to our attendees here, please feel free to contact us, because right after this meeting, we can quickly schedule you kind of like a consultation meeting on how to really get you guys started on using the RE tool. So again, you have my our email address, and again, we can talk with you guys after this meeting to incorporate the tool into your operations. So yeah.
Thanks, Andy. So the other questions are there are more questions from registration. I would just like to look at the chat quickly. There's a question on when will the 10-year version of the tool be ready? And the answer to that is we are working to an end of the month deadline for the I don't know if it's the right term, beta version, but a version that should be usable. However, that needs to be tested outside of the project team to ensure that it's of the right quality and the bugs have been worked out. Without sounding like I'm making excuses, Excel is a tool that is not quite designed, or a software package that's not really designed to do what we're doing for this resource efficiency and greenhouse gas tool. So bugs are common, and therefore we need to make sure that they're fixed before use, and that doesn't always happen. So it's better that we don't share the 10-year tool when there are bugs in it. I hope you can bear with us on that one. So as I said, we'll have a version that's ready for testing at the end of the month. And hopefully, if we've done our job well, that there will be very few bugs and feedback will be good, and we won't have to do anything else. But experience tells me that we'll probably need to fix some things. In terms of how long it will take to fix them, that really depends on what the bugs are. So I wish I could give you a little bit more information, but hopefully for the moment that's sufficient. The next question is if we skip 2020, can we continue adding the following year to the tool? You can do that. The way that it's set up at the moment, you would have to in the 3-year tool, for example, if I show using the facility info sheet, that say let's change it to be clear. So say you had 2019 and you're skipping 2020, you would have to remove your 2020 data from the tool. And the other thing is, I should say, this currently the start month is April because of the UK financial year. That was just for convenience. You can change the start month. So say we're looking at a European calendar year here. That in the example that was suggested, that if you want to skip 2020, you would have to delete or not enter any data, but still leave it as a blank year. The reason, and I'm sorry about this, but the reason for that is that many of the features in the current version of the tool are laid out on a sort of a 3-year data entry basis, and will pull information not by the year that's entered, but by the starting year plus 1. So if you put the 2021 data in data collection year 2, and your year 1 was 2019, the tool would think it was 2020 regardless of what you did. So you would have to leave, if you do skip a year, you have to skip a year in the tool as well. You can't just manually skip a year, if that makes sense. So that's Andy, your hand is up.
Hi Sam. What about for those hotels? So for one reason or another, they were not able to recover, for example, a year's worth of data. Um, for example, for January to June, for some reason they can't recover their data from the database. Can they just leave it blank, or do they have to input 0?
It's a very good question. So they should leave it blank. If hopefully I can go back to it. There we go. That's on most of the data entry cells. Apologies if we've missed some. There should be some guidance on that. So you can see on on this facility info sheet, it says please enter 0 if there were no guests for this identification for this month, and with the alternative being if there are no data, don't enter anything. So if you can't recover January to April, say, and don't enter anything, and then you had no guests, you know that for sure in May you'd have 0, and I don't know that, and that's for the first 6 months of 2020. So you have no data for the first 4 months. You knew there were no guests in May because the hotel was closed, and then you opened up again in June and you had 1,320. Hopefully that's
Okay, yeah.
clear, Andy. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
good. So going back to the question list quickly from those submitted before the start of this, we only have 5 minutes, so I'll quickly look through and see if I can answer as many as possible. I think the first one is how effective is the tool in measuring greenhouse gas emissions? It is an important one to cover. So this tool models greenhouse gas emissions. All greenhouse gas emissions for businesses will be modeled. The scope 1 emissions, so fuel use, direct emissions from the business, will be relatively accurate because scientific experiments have been conducted on what sort of emissions come from, say, using diesel fuel. And they'll differ, of course, but they'll be relatively similar for every business, therefore. If you used 100 litres of diesel, your scope 1 emissions from diesel will be pretty accurate. Your electricity use will be dependent on how quickly your country's grid factor is changing, meaning that what mix of energy is the country using on a day-to-day basis or a year-to-year basis. We've taken the Philippines grid balance, grid mix. I can't remember which year now. I'm losing track of time. I think it's 2018. We used the latest available when we were building the tool. There is the ability to change the grid factor for businesses to improve that when the government releases more and better information on grid factor, and that's in the greenhouse gas footprint part of the tool. So that can be relatively accurate. Scope 3 is less so. So as I said, it's not a full footprint, so we don't include all scope 3. We have done materiality assessment, meaning that food is the most material to scope 3 emissions from businesses, in tourism businesses, and therefore that's the one that's reported. The footprinting of food is tricky. It's possible, in theory, to do life cycle assessments for all of the food that you purchase, and that you would have a much more accurate footprint for your scope 3 emissions from food. That's unrealistic for most businesses to do, probably any business to do. It's very expensive. Therefore, you will need to take studies that have been done by other people and combine them up, and that's what we've done. So in terms of how accurate that is to your business, for the Philippines, it's better than, say, Spain. We haven't looked at food factors for Spain specifically. We have done a little bit of tailoring to the Philippines, but it's still a rough footprint rather than the most accurate one possible. This is because it doesn't need to be. It's scope 3, so it's your emissions that you're influencing outside of your direct control, but the ones that you have some direct influence. And B, you need to know where your hotspots are, where your areas of greatest reduction can be to take action, and that you don't need to know exactly how much you're going to be reducing your Scope 3 emissions, because ultimately those emissions should be accounted for by other people's Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in other countries. So while it is very important, it's only important to know them at a acceptable accuracy level rather than a detailed accuracy level. And I hope that makes sense. And I've probably spent far too much time talking about that, given we have two minutes left. So I think the other one I'd like to say is, what's the benefit on the business side? As a business, you will know better than me, but resources do equate to cost, financial cost. So even if you do not care about the effect that your business is having on the planet, and I'm sure you will do, but even if you didn't, being more resource efficient as a business will be more cost efficient as a business. So I think there's a immediate business benefit for looking at your resources and your resource use and consumption. And then in terms of the other benefits, you will be a good stakeholder in sustainable tourism as a business. If you're looking at your resource use and your resource efficiency, and you're reducing your impact on the environment through your resource use and efficiency, you're making it much more likely that tourism will continue to thrive in your area, and therefore your business will be sustainable in the long term. And that comes from the first step is to understanding what your resource use and your impact is, and that's what the tool can help you do. I think with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening to me speak for most of the hour, and I hope that I've answered your questions and that you understand this version of the tool better. And I'll hand over to Andy to conclude and say what the next steps are for the stakeholders on the call.
Thank you very much, Sam, for leading this session. To everyone else, honestly, I just wanted to say thank you for your time for attending this session. I know a lot of you are already using the tool, so I hope that this session gave you that chance to be able to be updated of everything that's new in the tool, and also to give some of you guys a refresher. So as mentioned a while ago, please feel free to contact us, and actually we will already start contacting you after this session. For those who mentioned that they were interested in using this tool, yeah, please expect us to contact you to set up a meeting so that we can get you more acquainted with the RE tool, and so that you can start monitoring your resource consumption, and of course, again, to be a bit more eligible for being a signatory of the Glasgow Declaration. So yeah, thank you so much, Sam. Andrea, do you have anything else to add?
Just to again thank you, and yeah, keep it short. If there are any questions, please feel free to contact, as Andy said, us at any time. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. Please have a good afternoon for the Philippines, and have a good day, Andrea and Sam. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you.